In 1985, a young highway officer pulled over on a dark, empty road. She radioed in, "I'm going to check something out." That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Minutes turned to hours. Hours turned to panic. When other officers arrived, all they found was her patrol car, lights flashing, engine running, but she was gone. No struggle, no footprints, nothing. For 19 years, the town, her family, and fellow officers searched, hopping for a clue that never came, until a fisherman drifted into a forgotten swamp. What he saw rising from the water stunned everyone. Inside, the truth waited, and it was more shocking and heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. If you're ready to uncover the full story, watch till the end. Hit like, subscribe, and comment where you think the first clue appeared. She was only 25 years old when she pinned on her badge. For her, being a highway patrol officer wasn't just a job, it was a dream. Growing up, she had always wanted to protect people. Her parents remembered how, as a kid, she would chase her brothers around the yard pretending to be a cop, telling them, "Stop, you're under arrest." Everyone laughed then. Nobody imagined one day it would be real. She was one of the few women on the highway patrol at that time. That alone made her stand out. Some officers respected her right away. Others weren't so sure. Back then, women in uniform were rare, and she had to work twice as hard to prove herself. Her family was proud but also worried. Every time she put on her uniform, her mother would say, "Be careful out there. Please come back home." She would smile, hug her mom, and promise she would. Her dad, though, couldn't hide his pride. When he saw her in her uniform, standing straight, badge shining on her chest, he told friends, "That's my daughter. She's strong. She's brave. She's making history." But behind her smile, she felt the weight. The job was dangerous. She knew it. Every shift meant facing speeding cars, strangers, and unknown risks. She trained hard. She studied the roads. She told herself she could handle whatever came. She wanted to be a symbol that women could serve and protect just as well as men. And for a while she was. She earned respect. She pulled over reckless drivers. She helped families stranded on the roadside. She carried herself with quiet confidence. But in the back of her mind, she also knew something else. Wearing the uniform meant being a target. People respected the badge, yes, but others hated it. Some saw officers as enemies. She was aware of that every time she stepped into her car. Still, she never showed fear. She told her friends, "This is the life I chose. I'll do it with pride." And in 1985, as she climbed into her patrol car for what seemed like another ordinary night shift, her family had no idea it would be the last time they ever saw her alive. It was late summer, 1985. The sun had set hours earlier, leaving only darkness stretched across the empty highway. Her patrol car rolled down the road, headlights slicing through the night. The engine hummed steady. The radio crackled now and then, but most of the time silence filled the car. The highway she covered was long, flat, and lonely. On some nights, she could drive for miles without passing another vehicle. The blacktop shimmered faintly under the headlights, stretching into nothing. She sat tall in her seat, uniform crisp, hand resting near her radio. The night air outside was heavy and still, pressing against the windows. Occasionally, a bug would smack against the glass, leaving a faint streak before vanishing into the dark. Her eyes moved constantly, mirrors, road, ditches, horizon. This was the rhythm of highway patrol. Endless watching, endless waiting. Once in a while, a pair of headlights would appear far ahead. She'd grip the wheel tighter, alert, ready to react. Was it a family heading home late, a trucker pushing through fatigue, or someone with darker intentions? She never knew. That was the danger and the thrill of the job. That night, though, traffic was almost non-existent. She was alone out there, miles of road, miles of silence. The kind of silence that could make your own heartbeat sound too loud. She checked her dashboard clock. Past midnight. Her shift still had hours to go. The radio dispatcher gave quick updates now and then, but nothing serious. No big chases. No calls for backup. Just her car, and the highway stretching endlessly into the dark. To anyone else it would feel isolating, but she was used to it. This was her duty, to watch, to guard, to make sure nothing bad happened while the rest of the town slept. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this quiet highway shift was about to turn into something far more terrifying, because before sunrise her patrol car would vanish, and by morning, the young officer who had promised her mother she'd come home would never be seen alive again. The highway stretched empty in front of her, black and endless. She scanned the ditches, the tree line, the faint glow of a dirt road cutting into the woods. Her hand reached for the radio. "Dispatch," she said, her voice calm but focused. "I'm going to check something out." Her words sounded routine. No panic, no alarm, just another update from a patrol officer doing her job. Dispatch replied, "Copy that, keep us advised." She clipped the radio back, turned her steering wheel, and eased her patrol car onto the shoulder. Her headlights swept across tall grass and a narrow gravel turnoff. To Dispatch, it was nothing unusual. Officers called in all the time. Maybe she spotted a stalled car. Maybe a driver pulled over. Maybe she just wanted to check the area. But what nobody knew at that moment, what nobody could have imagined, was that these words would be the last time her voice was ever heard. She stepped on the gas, guiding her patrol car down the gravel path. Darkness swallowed her headlights. The sound of rocks crunching under her tires echoed in the night. Minutes passed. The radio stayed silent. For Dispatch, this wasn't strange, not yet. Sometimes calls were quick. Officers checked something, then got back on the road. She would likely call again in a few minutes. But she didn't. She never did. And inside the dispatch center, no one realized that a young officer's routine check had just turned into a nightmare. The kind of nightmare that would leave her patrol car missing for nearly 20 years. 5 minutes went by. Then 10. Dispatch tried again. "Unit 47, status check." Silence. The dispatcher leaned closer to the mic. "Unit 47, do you copy?" Still nothing. At first they thought maybe her radio had static, or maybe she was busy with someone on the roadside. That happened all the time. But as the minutes ticked by, unease began to spread. Another officer, patrolling nearby, was told to check her last known location. He swung his cruiser around, lights flashing red and blue across the highway. His tires roared as he pushed the gas harder, racing toward where she had last reported in. "Dispatch, I'll head that way," he said. By now everyone felt it. Something wasn't right. He drove past the mile markers, scanning both sides of the road. Nothing. He slowed near the gravel turnoff she had mentioned, headlights sweeping over weeds and brush. He drove down it slowly. Still no sign. No patrol car. No radio reply. No officer. The silence was crushing. Back at dispatch, the calls kept going out, sharper now. "Unit 47, do you copy? Do you copy?" The radio hissed, but her voice never came back. By the end of that shift, panic would spread across the department. An officer had vanished, in plain sight, on a highway she had driven 100 times. And the worst part, nobody had seen a thing. The second officer rolled slowly down the shoulder. Then, there it was. A set of red and blue lights pierced the night. Her cruiser. It was sitting on the side of the road, engine still running, headlights cutting into the dark. He pulled up fast, slammed the gear into park and jumped out. His flashlight beam hit the glass. Empty. He opened the door. Inside, her hat sat neatly on the passenger seat. Her radio was still clipped in place. Even her gun was there, holstered, untouched. But the driver's seat, the place where she should have been, was empty. The officer called it in immediately. "Dispatch, I found her cruiser. Vehicle is running, she's not here." The silence that followed was heavy. More units rushed in. They circled the car, shining flashlights into the brush, yelling her name into the night. No answer. The scene didn't make sense. Her car was working. Her gear was inside. No signs of a fight, no blood, no broken glass. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. But everyone there knew one thing. An officer doesn't just leave her cruiser like that. Something was very wrong. The call spread through the department like fire. Officer missing, cruiser found abandoned. Within minutes, supervisors were on the radio, voices tight, urgent. More units screamed down the highway, lights cutting through the night. They crowded around the scene, flashlights sweeping through tall grass, down the gravel path, across the tree line. Nothing. The supervisors stepped in, trying to stay calm, but their faces showed the truth. Fear. An officer had vanished. This wasn't a routine call anymore. This was a crisis. One sergeant barked orders: search the ditches, spread out. Nobody works alone. The men and women of the department pushed into the dark, shouting her name, listening for movement. All they heard was the hum of crickets, the distant rush of highway cars, and the steady flash of her empty cruiser. Back at the station, phones lit up. Commanders were woken from their beds. Calls went out to neighboring counties. Everyone needed to know. A highway patrol officer was missing on duty. By midnight, the panic had reached her family. A supervisor knocked on her parents' door. They opened it, confused, still half asleep. The words froze them in place. Your daughter is missing. In the hours that followed, the search grew bigger. Officers, deputies, even state police swarmed the area. They pushed through fields, dragged the ditches, and brought in dogs to pick up her scent. Still nothing. The night that had started like any other shift was now a nightmare, and the terrifying question spread through every officer, every family, and every home in town. If someone could make a patrol officer vanish in the middle of her duty, who else wasn't safe? The phone rang at 2 a.m. Her mother stirred, reaching groggily. Her father answered, voice still heavy with sleep. Hello. A voice on the line was tense, clipped. Mr. and Mrs. last name. This is Sergeant Collins with the Highway Patrol. Your daughter, she's missing. Her cruiser was found abandoned. We don't know where she is. The words hit like a hammer. Her mother gasped, clutching the phone to her chest. Her father stood frozen, eyes wide, the color drained from his face. Missing? What do you mean missing? She whispered, trembling. The sergeant repeated it, trying to be calm, but urgency and fear leaked through. We are searching. We need you to stay home for now. Please, we'll update you. Her parents sank onto the couch, holding each other, hearts pounding. Shock paralyzed them first. Then dread took over, curling in their stomachs like a cold hand. They tried to think rationally. Could it be an accident? Could she have been hurt somewhere? But every scenario twisted into fear. Every option ended with terror. Minutes passed. Their minds raced with images of her last moments, their daughter, alone on the dark highway, checking something, radios in hand, suddenly gone. Her father ran to her bedroom. Her uniform hung in the closet, neatly pressed, badge shining. Everything looked ordinary. Nothing could prepare them for the reality that she wasn't coming home. For hours, the parents sat in stunned silence, punctuated only by ringing phones and occasional updates from dispatch. By the time the sun began to rise, the crushing reality had set in. Their daughter had vanished. By morning, news spread through the small town like wildfire. Neighbors whispered as they walked to work. Friends called friends. The grocery store, the diner, even the gas station, everyone was talking about the missing officer. Some said she must have been ambushed. There are dangerous people on the highway, one man muttered. Maybe someone waited for her. Others suggested something more shocking. Maybe she ran away, a neighbor whispered, voice low. Maybe she didn't want to be found. No one knew, but speculation grew with every passing hour. Police officers fielded questions while trying to continue the search. Each rumor made their job harder. Each whisper added weight to an already heavy night. Inside the town, fear began to creep in. If a highway patrol officer could vanish in the middle of her shift, then what chance did anyone else have of safety? At the local diner, conversation swirled. She was careful, she knew the roads, how could this happen? At the bus station, someone argued, maybe it's more than an accident, maybe someone wanted her gone. Even the children at school had heard the story. Where, officer last name? They asked, eyes wide. The seeds of a mystery had been planted. By the end of the day, the town was buzzing with fear, doubt, and endless questions. Every shadow on the highway, every rustle in the trees, felt like a clue that might never be solved. And while officers combed the roads, fields, and ditches, the sense of something sinister began to take root. Her disappearance wasn't just an isolated event. It was the start of a story that would haunt the town for decades. The night erupted with sirens. Dozens of patrol cars flooded the highway, red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. Engines roared as officers raced to the last known location of the missing patrolwoman. Officers spilled onto the roadside, flashlights swinging across the ditches, overgrown fields, and empty woods. They called her name over and over, voices tight with worry. "Unit 47, come in. Do you copy?" Search lines were formed. Groups of officers spread out, moving slowly, methodically. Each step, each shout carried a mix of hope and dread. Some officers pushed into shallow woods, bending low to inspect every shadow. Others scanned the highway shoulder again and again, trying to see something they had surely missed. Dogs were brought in, noses to the ground. Their handlers whispered commands, urging them to find even the faintest scent. The dogs sniffed, tugged, and ran ahead, then stopped suddenly at a ditch, but the trail ended there. Nothing. Dispatch was constant chaos. Radios crackled nonstop. Officers called in updates. "Still nothing," one shouted. Another replied, "We're widening the search." Even the people living near the highway woke to the sound. Some stepped outside, watching the flashing lights. Word spread quickly. An officer was missing. Everyone felt it. The panic, the fear that something terrible had happened. Hours passed. The search stretched over miles of road. Trees whispered in the wind. Shadows shifted. Every moment the sense of urgency grew. They knew one thing for certain. A young officer had vanished in the line of duty, and the night would not give up its secrets easily. Soon the ground search wasn't enough. Helicopters were called in, cutting through the night sky. Spotlights burned bright, scanning fields, rivers, and swamps. From above, the highways seemed endless. The small patches of forest looked like black blotches beneath the glowing beams. Pilots reported what they saw. Officers on the ground tracked the beams as they passed over roads, fields, and empty riverbanks. Every area was checked, every shadow examined. The search expanded for miles. Roads were blocked. Bridges were checked. Farmers' fields, usually quiet at night, were illuminated as if it were daylight. Divers waited near swampy stretches, ready to enter the water at a moment's notice. Their boats drifted quietly on the dark surface, spotlight beams piercing the black reflections. Dispatch tried to keep coordination. Ground teams moved in sync with the helicopters. "Sector 5 clear. Sector 6 moving in," radios crackled. Every second mattered. The helicopters circled again and again, but the ground gave no answers. Nothing moved. No sign of her. No footprints. No disturbed brush. Only the quiet of the night, broken by the rotors above and the constant calls from officers. Families and neighbors watched, some holding children, whispering prayers. Everyone wanted to believe she would be found safe. Hours passed. The sun was still far from rising, and yet the search showed nothing. The empty fields, the black rivers, and the quiet forest swallowed any clue the night might have offered. The helicopters hovered, circling, searching, hopping to spot something anyone on the ground might have missed. But in that vast darkness, the patrolwoman remained missing. Every officer, every volunteer, and every heart waiting for her return felt it. This was going to be a long, painful search. K-9 units were brought in as the night stretched on. The dogs, trained to track human scent, sniffed at the grass and dirt along the roadside. Their handlers guided them carefully, voices low but firm. "Find her. Follow the trail." The dogs pulled forward, noses to the ground, ears alert, tails stiff. Every few seconds they stopped, twitched, and turned, then sprinted ahead again. Officers followed closely, flashlights cutting through the black woods. The scent grew stronger, leading them down a narrow path that disappeared into thick trees. Minutes passed. The trail wound deeper into the woods. Leaves crunched underfoot. Every rustle of branches made hearts pound faster. Finally, the dogs reached the edge of a swamp. The water was still, dark, and thick with reeds and mud. The scent of her, once so strong, vanished. The handlers exchanged uneasy glances. They looked at the water. The dogs whined softly, pawing at the ground. They had brought the officers this far, but the trail ended abruptly at the swamp. Divers were called in. Boats were readied. Officers shined lights across the water, hopping to see something, anything. But the swamp held its secrets tightly. No footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing to indicate where she might have gone. For the officers, the reality was sinking in. The trail that had once seemed promising ended in mystery. The young patrolwoman had disappeared into the night, and now even the dogs could not follow her. The edge of the swamp became a silent, eerie boundary. a line between hope and fear. By dawn, word had spread through the town. Hundreds of townspeople gathered, ready to help. Farmers left their fields. Shopkeepers closed early. Anyone who could search came. Officers directed the volunteers, forming teams. Cornfields, abandoned barns, and roadside ditches became search zones. People combed every inch, calling her name, shining flashlights into shadows, feeling for signs of her. The air was thick with tension. Every rustle in the trees made someone jump. Every creek and ditch was inspected. Volunteers shouted to one another when they thought they saw something. Old clothes, a tire, even a stray backpack. But each turned out to be nothing. Children stayed with parents, wide-eyed, hearing the calls and sirens but too young to fully understand. Adults whispered prayers. Every volunteer knew the stakes. One missing officer meant the whole town held its breath. Officers coordinated the search, giving instructions over radios. Everyone was moving fast, yet careful, afraid to miss even the smallest clue. Hours passed. Sweat dripped. Feet ached. But still nothing was found. No sign of her boots, no hat, no radio, no patrol car. Volunteers combed every field, every barn, every ditch. Dogs returned with no new scent. The swamp was checked again. Still nothing. The frustration grew. People began to whisper, wondering how someone could simply vanish. Officers looked at one another with grim faces. The same thought ran through every head. How could an officer disappear on her own highway with so many people searching? By evening, the volunteers left tired and disheartened. The officers stayed, refusing to give up. The search had become more than a duty. It was a desperate fight against time and the unknown. And in the town, fear began to grow. A young officer, strong and trained, had vanished into thin air. The answers seemed just out of reach. For everyone involved, it was clear. The mystery was only beginning. By the second day, the story had spread beyond the small town. National news picked up the disappearance. Reporters and camera crews arrived, trucks rolling down the highway, lights flashing. Helicopters hovered overhead. Microphones were shoved in every officer's face. Cameras captured the desperate search. Officers dragging ditches. Volunteers combing fields. Dogs sniffing every corner of the roadside. Every shot was heavy with tension. Every frame filled with fear. The reporters asked questions over and over. What happened? Is she alive? How could a trained officer disappear? Her family was shown on live television, faces pale, eyes red from crying. Her mother pleaded, voice trembling, "Please, if anyone knows anything, tell us." Her father tried to remain composed but couldn't hide the pain in his eyes. News vans parked outside every street in town. The air buzzed with chatter, speculation, and the clicking of cameras. For the residents, this wasn't just a local tragedy anymore. It had become a story the whole country was watching. Some reporters suggested theories: an accident, foul play, even abduction. Each theory, broadcast into millions of homes, added pressure on the officers. Volunteers, neighbors, and friends watched themselves on television, heart pounding. Some felt fear, others helplessness. Everyone was united by one thought: she had to be found. Despite the flashing cameras and frantic questions, the patrolwoman remained missing. Every night, the town went to bed with the same heavy thought: where could she be? The media storm only grew as hours turned into days. Headlines screamed, "Highway officer vanishes in small town and nationwide search underway." For the family, the constant cameras were both a comfort and a torment. Comfort because the world cared. Torment because it reminded them just how long the search had gone without answers. No one could predict what the coming days would reveal. The young officer, trained and skilled, was still out there somewhere, and everyone was desperate to find her. Her parents and siblings refused to let hope die. Every night they lit candles in the living room, placing them carefully on the windowsill so the town could see the soft glow. Each flame represented a prayer, a plea, a wish that she would come home. They held vigils in the streets. Neighbors joined, standing quietly, some holding hands, others whispering words of encouragement. The town began to rally around the family, sharing in the fear, the hope, and the helplessness. The family appeared on television again and again, begging the public for any tip, any sign of hope. "Please," her mother said, voice cracking. "If anyone sees her, hears something, anything, call us. Bring her home." Her father carried her photo everywhere, in the police station, at the search sites, and even to the local stores. He refused to let her face be forgotten. Her siblings wrote letters, handed out flyers, and spoke to every local group that would listen. Every day was filled with searching, with hope, and with heartbreak. Even when tips came in from other towns and states, they followed each one, chasing shadows and rumors. Some were false, some led to dead ends, but the family never gave up. Officers watching the family were inspired. Their determination added urgency to the search. Every day, more volunteers arrived. Every day, the town pushed forward. Through exhaustion and despair, her family stayed strong. They refused to accept that she was gone without a trace. Every candle, every flyer, every plea to the public carried a single message: we will not stop looking. Even as weeks passed and hope began to feel fragile, they pressed on. The patrolwoman's disappearance became more than a case. It became a mission, fueled by love, determination, and the refusal to surrender. No matter how dark the night, the family refused to give up. Their hope became the engine of the search, keeping everyone searching, calling, and believing that one day they might find her. The phone lines never stopped ringing. Every day, calls flooded in from across the country. Strangers swore they saw her walking down a street in another state. Others claimed she had been in a diner, ordering coffee like nothing had happened. Some said they saw her at bus stations, waiting quietly for a bus that never left. Officers and detectives followed every lead. Each report was checked carefully. Teams drove to distant towns, examined video footage, and questioned witnesses. For a moment there was hope. Maybe she had left town, maybe she was alive, hiding somewhere. But every lead collapsed. The people who thought they had seen her were mistaken. Faces didn't match, times didn't match, locations didn't match. It became a pattern. Every sighting brought a surge of adrenaline, then disappointment. Each false lead felt like a punch to the stomach. Her family clung to each report, hoping for a miracle. But officers had learned to temper hope with caution. The town began to notice. People whispered at work, in stores, in schools. "Did you hear? She was seen in Michigan or maybe Georgia." Each rumor ignited a mix of fear and fascination. Still, the patrolwoman remained missing. Weeks turned into months. The officer was still gone. The small town began to change. The absence of a young, skilled patrolwoman left a void that no one could fill. Mothers whispered to their children to stay close to home. Neighbors eyed strangers with suspicion. Every dark road, every empty highway felt dangerous. Rumors grew louder. If someone could make her vanish, what's stopping them from doing it again? People whispered in the grocery stores, at diners, and along the sidewalks. The police department tried to stay calm, but inside, fear was thick. Officers who once patrolled confidently now double-checked every call. Every vehicle, every suspicious person, set nerves on edge. Her family never stopped. They continued holding vigils, posting flyers, talking to anyone who would listen. But even they felt the creeping anxiety, the fear that the person who took their daughter might never be caught. The town watched them, learning from their pain. Slowly, the community shared the family's tension, the same mix of grief and fear. Every shadow in the woods, every vehicle on the highway, every stranger passing through town became a question. Could this be connected? The disappearance had done more than vanish an officer. It had unsettled the town itself. And in the back of everyone's mind, the same chilling thought lingered. If a trained officer could disappear so completely, no one was safe, not even in the middle of their own town. The fear, once just a whisper, became a constant presence. And the young patrolwoman's absence continued to haunt every street, every home, and every heart in the community. Detectives looked at the highway map again and again. They traced her last known route, mile by mile, curve by curve. The question haunted them: had she pulled someone over and been overpowered? They interviewed drivers who had been on that stretch of road that night. Some remembered a patrol car, lights flashing, but no one recalled anything suspicious. Others admitted they had driven fast, cut corners, ignored the speed limit, but none remembered a confrontation. Officers retraced the roads themselves, trying to see what she had seen, what she might have noticed. Each ditch, each turnoff, each dark stretch was examined. Detectives looked for anyone with a record of violence, someone who might have had a reason to harm her. They checked local criminals, people she had arrested before, even strangers passing through. Every name became a question mark, every past incident a possible lead. Evidence was slim. No footprints, no broken glass, no signs of struggle. Still, the theory made sense. A routine traffic stop could turn deadly in seconds, especially on an empty highway at night. The department discussed the possibility in detail. They imagined her approaching a car, flashlight in hand, badge on her chest. One wrong move could have cost her life. But as hours turned into days, the leads faded. The highway was empty. No witness, no suspect, no clues to confirm the theory. Still, detectives couldn't ignore it. Every officer who drove that road felt the unease. What if, just for a moment, a driver had been waiting for her? What if the road had swallowed her without leaving a trace? The first theory remained plausible but unproven, and the more detectives thought about it, the more chilling it became. An officer, trained and alert, gone in an instant. Whispers began to spread inside the department. Maybe it wasn't a random traffic stop. Maybe someone had planned it. Detectives considered every criminal she had arrested in the past. They looked at grudges, threats, old cases left unresolved. Had someone been waiting for her that night, knowing she would patrol the lonely road? The thought chilled every officer. Ambushes were rare but possible, and this wasn't just any officer. She was young, careful, and respected. If someone could catch her off guard, anyone could be next. Theories multiplied. Perhaps a local gang seeking revenge. Perhaps someone she had questioned months before, now plotting quietly. Maybe even someone who knew her routine, who knew the routes she patrolled most often. Investigators retraced her steps again, imagining the scene. Darkness pressed in, a car hiding behind a bend, shadows moving in the trees. Every flash of headlights could have been her last sight of the world. Officers interviewed former criminals, neighbors, and townspeople. Every answer seemed incomplete. Every lead had gaps. Suspicion even touched other officers, though no one admitted it aloud. The department felt tension like never before. The fear grew. If this had been planned, then it wasn't an accident. It was calculated. And that meant the person or people responsible were smart, patient, and willing to wait years to avoid detection. For the family, the idea of a planned attack was unbearable. For the town, it meant their streets were not safe. For the detectives, it became the question that refused to go away: who wanted her gone and why? The theory of an ambush spread quietly, a shadow over every conversation, every patrol, every investigation. No proof yet, but the fear was real, and it wouldn't leave anyone alone. Investigators began to consider a chilling possibility. What if she got out of the car willingly? It didn't make sense at first. She was trained. She was cautious. She knew the risks of stopping for a stranger on a lonely highway. But what if the person she met wasn't a stranger? Detectives dug into her life, talking to friends, neighbors, and coworkers. They asked who she trusted, who she spent time with, who knew her schedule. Each name became a potential lead. It was unsettling to think about. Could someone she knew have lured her away? Someone she trusted enough to leave the safety of her patrol car? They retraced her last known movements, trying to imagine a scenario where she walked toward a car or a person. Who could convince her it was safe? Who could hide danger behind a familiar face? The theory opened a dark possibility. This wasn't random. It was personal. Someone who knew her routines, who understood her habits, could have orchestrated everything. Detectives questioned former colleagues, friends, even casual acquaintances. Every conversation was weighed carefully. No one could provide a concrete answer. Everyone who knew her seemed to be cleared, or at least, nothing concrete pointed to them. Still, the thought lingered in the room. Officers spoke in hushed tones, uneasy at the idea that someone close could be involved. It wasn't just about a missing officer anymore. It was about trust, betrayal, and the terrifying possibility that danger came from where it was least expected. Even the family shivered at the suggestion. How could someone so young and careful have been tricked? Yet the possibility couldn't be ignored. The question haunted everyone. Had she vanished because she trusted the wrong person? Rumors began to ripple through the department. Could a fellow officer be involved? The idea shocked many. Officers had trained together, shared rides, watched each other's backs. The thought of betrayal inside their own force was almost impossible to consider. But as investigators examined the case, doubts crept in. Small inconsistencies, unanswered questions, conflicting statements, each detail fueled suspicion. Whispers spread quietly at roll call in hallways over radios. Did you notice what he said? Why was she alone that night? Maybe someone knew more than they admitted. Detectives reviewed schedules, patrol logs, and past complaints. Every officer who had been on duty that night became a person of interest, even if only briefly. The tension inside the department grew. Trust, once strong and steady, began to crack. Officers eyed each other warily, wondering if a colleague could have done the unthinkable. At the station, conversations were cautious. Emails were scrutinized. Phone calls were noted. Even casual comments carried weight. For the family, the idea of betrayal within the force was almost too much to bear. They had counted on the police to protect her. Now, even that security felt fragile. The department continued working the case, but the shadow of suspicion hung over every decision. Every lead, every interview, every check became more than just procedure. It was a search for answers within their own ranks. No proof had been found yet, but distrust had taken root. The young officer's disappearance was no longer just a mystery. It had become a story of fear, doubt, and the unshakable question: who could be trusted? The community would never see the inside of the department, but they could sense it: the quiet tension, the uncertainty. And that fear spread like wildfire. If someone inside the force might be involved, then no one was truly safe. As the investigation dragged on, whispers began to ripple through the town. Families gathered in kitchens, living rooms, and at local diners, talking in low voices. "Do you think the police know more than they're saying?" one mother asked. Could they be covering something up? The idea spread quickly. People remembered small stories, old grudges, or past conflicts. Any gap in the investigation became a question. Why hadn't the car been found sooner? Why were certain leads ignored? Some townspeople suggested corruption. They wondered if someone high in the department was protecting the person responsible. Others whispered about mistakes that were hidden to avoid public shame. The tension in the town grew. Neighbors watched officers with suspicion. Every car, every movement, every detail was questioned. Detectives felt it too. They sensed the unease when talking to the public. Every answer had to be carefully chosen. Any slip could ignite more fear, more rumors. Inside the department, conversations were cautious. Officers exchanged guarded glances. Trust was fragile. Investigators could no longer assume that everyone involved was loyal to the truth. Even her family couldn't help but feel the weight of the whispers. The people who were supposed to find answers, people sworn to uphold the law, might be hiding something. The thought was almost unbearable. Every day, new questions arrived, some from outsiders, some from within. Every unanswered question became another spark for the rumor fire. The town's quiet sense of security had vanished. They no longer believed the system could be fully trusted. And in the shadows, the missing officer's absence became more than a mystery. It became a mirror for fear, doubt, and betrayal. The whispers would not fade. They lingered in every corner, growing louder as days turned into months. Amid the tension and fear, another theory took shape. Some people suggested she had staged her own disappearance. Maybe she wanted to escape. Maybe she had grown tired of the job or of life in the small town. The rumor spread quietly at first, then louder. Every unanswered question, every mysterious lead was twisted into "maybe she did it herself." Detectives examined the idea just to be thorough. They looked for signs she might have planned to leave. Did she take her belongings? Did she withdraw money? Were there notes or letters? The answer was clear. Nothing suggested she wanted to vanish. Her car, hat, gun, and radio were left behind. Her patrol duties were always taken seriously. Her family refused to accept the theory. They spoke out repeatedly, telling anyone who would listen. She loved her badge. She loved this job. She loved us too much to just disappear. Even her closest friends were certain. The thought that she would leave voluntarily was impossible. It contradicted everything they knew about her. But the theory persisted. Every rumor, every false sighting, every unanswered question fed it. People wanted answers, and when none appeared, they filled the gaps with speculation. Officers and detectives had to address the theory publicly. They explained why it made no sense, but the town's fear and frustration made them skeptical. Despite the denials, the runaway theory grew like a shadow. It highlighted the desperation of the town, the need to explain the unexplainable. Even in the department, quiet discussions took place. Could she have chosen this? Some wondered, but most officers shook their heads. She was too disciplined, too loyal, too brave to ever leave willingly. The missing officer's absence had become a puzzle. Every possible explanation seemed incomplete, and the runaway idea, though false, showed just how desperate everyone was for any kind of answer. The truth, however, remained stubbornly out of reach. Detectives began questioning anyone who might have a connection to the missing officer. Ex-convicts who lived nearby were brought in. Their pasts were checked for threats, grudges, or violent histories. Investigators asked pointed questions, looking for the smallest slip or hesitation. Stalkers, people who had shown obsession with local women, were also interviewed. Detectives examined their movements, alibis, and behavior. Every phone call, every address, every tiny detail was scrutinized. Even old boyfriends were questioned. Detectives needed to know if jealousy, anger, or heartbreak could have caused someone to make her vanish. Friends and neighbors watched quietly as names and faces were brought to the station. Each interrogation brought a flicker of hope. Maybe now we'll have answers, officers thought. Perhaps someone would crack, confess, or reveal a clue that had been missed. But each time hope ended in frustration. No one admitted involvement. Alibis checked out. Evidence was either missing or inconclusive. Nothing connected any of them to the disappearance. Officers left the station late at night, tired and frustrated. Every lead felt like it might break the case open. Every dead end left them with more questions than before. Even the town noticed. Rumors about who had been questioned spread quickly, stirring fear, suspicion, and gossip. Despite all the work, the young officer remained missing. No one knew if she was alive or gone, and no one had answers. The investigation pressed forward, but the frustration and weight of failure began to settle in. Time passed. Weeks became months, months became years. Without a body, without a crime scene, and without a clear suspect, the case began to lose momentum. Leads grew colder. Tips ran out. Evidence vanished into dead ends. Detectives continued working, but the energy of the first days had faded. The department struggled to keep the search alive. Officers rotated onto other cases, though some never stopped thinking about her. In the town, her absence became a constant shadow. People remembered her patrol car abandoned on the roadside. They remembered the fear that gripped the community that night. The young officer, once full of life, pride, and dedication, began to fade into legend. People told her story quietly, as a warning. New recruits at the department learned of her as a cautionary tale, someone who disappeared and no one could explain why. Her family held onto hope, refusing to let her name be forgotten. But even they began to feel the crushing weight of time. Every year without answers made grief sharper, patience thinner, and hope harder to hold. Rumors persisted. Theories lingered. Whispers about ambush, betrayal, or mistakes in the investigation never fully died. The community learned a difficult truth. Not every mystery is solved quickly. Not every disappearance has answers. The patrolwoman's name joined the growing list of unsolved cases. Each one a reminder of what could happen, even to the careful, the trained, the dedicated. Though the search continued in small ways, the energy, the urgency, and the belief in a quick resolution had faded. The case stalled, and with it, the bright light of the young officer's presence seemed to dim in memory, leaving only questions, and a mystery that refused to be solved. The morning was still. The sun had not yet risen, and the swamp lay in thick silence. Mist hovered over the water, hiding the banks and the trees beyond. A fisherman pushed his small boat into the water, oars slicing quietly through the murky surface. He had been coming here for years, far from town, to places few people visited. The swamp was empty, except for birds and the occasional fish jumping. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the water too much. His mind wandered to the day ahead, bait to check, nets to mend, fish to catch, but mostly he enjoyed the quiet. There was peace here, away from noise and people. The mist made the swamp look endless. Shadows of trees reflected on the water, twisting with the movement of the boat. Every ripple seemed louder than usual in the morning calm. He steered past fallen branches and hidden stumps, guiding the boat along a narrow channel. He had never been in this particular part of the swamp before, but curiosity drew him forward. The air was cool, smelling of wet soil and old leaves. Frogs croaked in the distance, and a lone bird called somewhere unseen. The swamp seemed asleep. Hours could pass here without seeing another soul. The fisherman liked it that way. This was a place where the world felt far away. As he drifted deeper into the maze of waterways, he noticed subtle changes. The water grew darker, almost black in some places. The banks became steeper, and the trees hung heavier with moss. He slowed the boat, scanning the water carefully. Something about this section felt different, something hidden. And then, under the faint reflection of pre-dawn light, he caught a glint beneath the surface. At first he thought it was just junk. Old metal, maybe a barrel or scrap someone had dumped long ago. The swamp had plenty of debris after all. He leaned over the side of the boat, squinting into the murky water. The glint caught the faint sun as it rose slowly. It wasn't moving. It seemed solid. Curiosity pushed him closer. He reached for his pole, tapping at the water, disturbing small bubbles and fish. The shape became clearer, rectangular, rigid. He could make out edges under the water's surface. Something wasn't right. This wasn't ordinary junk. The shape was too precise, too structured. It looked like a car. His heart started to beat faster. A car? Here? In this part of the swamp? That made no sense. He had fished these waters for years and never noticed anything like it. He grabbed the oars and edged the boat closer, careful not to hit anything. The water was shallow here, yet the object beneath seemed heavy, pressing down on the mud at the bottom. The sun rose a little higher, glinting again on the surface. And suddenly he noticed a detail that made his stomach drop. The outline was unmistakable. A roof, a windshield, a shape he knew too well from childhood stories and police reports. He couldn't believe it. Could this really be what he thought it was? The patrol car that had disappeared almost 19 years ago. The thought made his hands tremble. He knew he had to call it in immediately. He pulled out his phone, fumbling to find the signal in the swamp. Every second felt heavy with tension. As he waited for the call to connect, he stared down at the dark water, the object submerged and still. It had been hidden here all this time, silent, untouched, and unknown. The truth was finally surfacing, almost 2 decades after the young officer had vanished. The fisherman leaned over the side of the boat, squinting at the dark water. The glint had drawn his attention, but now, as he focused, the outline became clearer. A roof, a hood, the edges of doors. The shape of a car slowly emerged from the murky depths. It wasn't floating, it was sunk, pressed into the muddy bottom of the swamp. He felt his chest tighten. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just scrap metal or a forgotten barrel. This was a vehicle, a real car. The details began to make sense. The angles of the windows, the curve of the roofline. He recognized the model from old photos, a patrol car from the 1980s. Nausea and shock hit him at the same time. Could it really be the missing patrol car? 19 years. 19 years it had been hidden here, silent beneath the water, untouched and unseen. He gripped the edge of the boat, feeling the weight of what he had discovered. The air seemed heavy, thick with tension. Every sound, the creak of the boat, the distant croak of frogs, felt amplified. He thought of the officer. Young, dedicated, vanished without a trace. And now, after nearly 2 decades, her patrol car sat here, deep in the swamp, holding secrets that had been buried for years. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. He knew this was not just a personal discovery. It was evidence, proof, and possibly the key to closing one of the most mysterious cases in the state. He scanned the water once more. The car was still, silent, menacing in its stillness. The thought that she had been inside, lost to the world, made his heart pound. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. One wrong move and this moment could be lost, so he stayed calm, observing the car, memorizing the position, the angle, and the reflections off the water. This was no ordinary morning on the swamp. This was the discovery that could finally answer questions left unanswered for almost 20 years. The fisherman grabbed his phone and called the authorities. His voice shook as he explained what he had found. "I think it's a patrol car in the swamp." Dispatchers listened carefully, then alerted local police. Soon, officers arrived, sirens silent but lights flashing, boats ready for divers. The news traveled fast. Within minutes, the quiet swamp became the center of a tense, carefully controlled operation. Divers prepared in wetsuits, checking oxygen tanks and ropes. Officers positioned themselves on the shore, scanning the water, holding their breath, waiting for confirmation. Everyone knew the stakes. 19 years of questions might finally meet answers here. The fisherman guided the officers to the spot. The swamp was dark and muddy, but the outline of the car was unmistakable beneath the water. Divers took their positions, signals given, and slowly began to descend. Each splash seemed louder than normal in the heavy morning air. Officers on the bank held tense, silent vigil, eyes glued to the water. Cameras from local media began arriving, capturing the moment. Time seemed to stretch. The boat rocked slightly, mud shifted, the air smelled of water and damp earth. The divers' movements were slow, careful, deliberate. Every second brought a mix of hope and dread. Then, through the murky water, the details became clearer. The shape of the patrol car, its roof crushed and windows clouded with years underwater, confirmed what the fishermen had feared and hoped for. Officers on the shore exchanged glances, understanding the weight of the discovery. This wasn't just an old car. It was the missing officer's vehicle, untouched and hidden for nearly 2 decades. The swamp, silent for so long, had finally given up its secret. The divers slipped beneath the surface, plunging into black, cold water. Visibility was almost zero. Mud swirled around them, clinging to wetsuits and equipment. They moved slowly, hands outstretched, feeling along the shapes hidden beneath the murky swamp. Every branch, root, and twisted metal edge sent a shiver up their spines. Seconds turned into minutes. The swamp held its secrets tightly, refusing to reveal anything easily. Then one diver's gloved fingers brushed against metal, a flat surface, cold and slick. They followed the edge, moving carefully, knowing that any wrong push could stir too much sediment and block their vision entirely. Suddenly, shapes began to form. A curve here, a line there. Slowly, unmistakably, the outline of a car emerged from the dark water. The diver traced the roof, then the hood, feeling the familiar ridges of a patrol car. The water had aged it, crushed it slightly with years of pressure, but the shape was undeniable. A hand reached along the side. Letters appeared through the grime and rust. Highway Patrol. The divers exchanged glances through their masks, though no words were spoken. They already knew. The missing officer's car had been found. Their hands carefully explored the interior. Items remained in place, dash, seats, even what looked like remnants of a radio. Years underwater had taken their toll, but the structure and contents were still intact enough to confirm it. They signaled to the surface. The officers on shore leaned in, eyes wide, heartbeats fast. The confirmation was coming slowly, deliberately, but there was no doubt. This was the moment that could finally end nearly 2 decades of questions. The swamp, silent for so long, had finally been breached. Secrets, hidden beneath layers of mud, water, and time, were surfacing. Cables were secured around the car. A crane groaned as it began to lift, pulling slowly through the black water. Mud, weeds, and years of swamp buildup slid off as the vehicle rose. Officers held their breath. Everyone on the bank was silent, watching carefully. Cameras clicked, capturing every second. The car broke the water's surface. Rust had eaten the metal, and years underwater had crushed the roof slightly, but the cruiser was unmistakable. It was hers. The missing officer's patrol car. Divers guided it carefully to the shallow shore, checking cables and ropes. They worked slowly, methodically. The weight of the car was immense, but every movement was precise. Once on land, the car rested in the mud. Officers approached cautiously. The waterlogged seats sagged. The doors barely closed, but the interior remained recognizable. Items still lay inside: her badge, sidearm, and uniform. The evidence confirmed what everyone suspected. This was the vehicle from that fateful night, lost nearly 19 years ago. The family, alerted by police, began the long drive to the swamp. Their hearts were heavy with grief and shock, but finally answers were coming. Investigators took photographs and notes. Every inch of the car was examined. Rusted, waterlogged, and crushed, it told a silent story. The patrol car had been here all along, hidden from the world, holding the truth about what happened that night. The town would hear soon. The nation would hear soon. But for now, the swamp had given up its secret quietly, and the missing officer's story, nearly 2 decades old, was finally moving toward an ending. Divers and investigators carefully opened the car doors. The smell of damp and decay hit immediately, a sharp reminder of the years the vehicle had spent underwater. Inside, the driver's seat held the grim evidence. Skeletal remains rested in place, slumped over as if the officer had never left her post. Time had erased everything but the bones. Fragments of the uniform clung to the skeleton. A torn sleeve, a faded patch, pieces of the dark green and tan fabric. And then, almost like a final confirmation, her badge sat partially buried under debris on the seat. The letters were still visible. Highway Patrol. No one spoke at first. The officers and divers exchanged glances, the silence thick with shock. This confirmed what they had feared and hoped. This was the missing officer. Every piece of evidence lined up with the reports from that long-ago night. The car, the uniform, the badge, it all told the same story. The scene was both tragic and important. Investigators photographed every angle, careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. Evidence would be crucial for the report, even if it could no longer tell all the answers. Outside, police radioed in updates. The confirmation sent ripples through the department. The missing officer had finally been located. Her family had been told to prepare. The news was devastating. Finally, the long wait, the endless years of searching, had reached a turning point. It was the moment that made everything real. 19 years of uncertainty and unanswered questions had ended, leaving grief, disbelief, and a haunting silence in its wake. News traveled fast. Within hours, the small town buzzed with the story. The missing officer, gone for 19 years, had finally been found. Shock hit first. People struggled to process it. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues whispered in disbelief. The patrol car, once just a memory and rumor, now sat out in the open, revealing the tragic truth. Grief followed quickly. Her family, still holding hope for years, now faced the reality they had avoided. 19 years of waiting, praying, and wondering had ended with bones and rust. But relief came too. Finally, there was closure in a way they could understand. They no longer had to imagine what had happened or hope for a miracle that might never come. The community gathered, some at the swamp, some at the station, trying to process the emotions. Officers who had trained with her years ago were silent, remembering the young, proud, and dedicated patrolwoman they had lost. Authorities confirmed the identification. Her belongings, uniform fragments, and badge inside the car left no doubt. This was the officer who had vanished on that lonely highway so long ago. The nation, which had followed the story, responded with a mix of sorrow and fascination. A disappearance that had haunted headlines for almost 2 decades finally had an answer. Yet even with the confirmation, questions remained. How did she end up there? Why hadn't the searchers found the car years ago? Who knew? The swamp had kept its secret for 19 years, finally revealing the officer and her vehicle. But not every mystery was solved. The community, the family, and the department faced a complicated mix of closure and unanswered questions. The officer was found, but the story, the fear, and the shock would linger for a long time. Before sunrise, the fisherman pushed his small boat into the swamp. The air was cool, heavy with mist that hovered over the water. Everything was quiet. No cars, no people, only the soft splash of oars cutting through dark water. He had been coming to these waters for years. Far from town, the swamp stretched in every direction, full of hidden channels, thick trees, and mud. Few ever visited this part, and he liked it that way. It was peaceful, a place where he could fish and think without interruptions. The boat drifted slowly, the motor off, so only the oars made sound. Mist blurred the edges of the trees, and the water reflected the first hints of dawn. Every ripple seemed louder than usual. He guided the boat along a narrow channel, past fallen branches and moss-draped trees. Something about this area felt different today, darker, older, untouched. Curiosity pushed him further, deeper into the swamp. He kept scanning the water, alert to anything unusual. Occasionally, fish jumped, breaking the silence. Birds called from unseen branches, their voices echoing across the still surface. Minutes passed. The swamp seemed endless, a maze of black water and thick trees. Yet he moved confidently, trusting the channels he had navigated before. As the sunlight shifted, a tiny flash caught his eye, a shimmer under the water, faint, almost hiding in the reflection. He froze, staring. Something was down there, something metallic, something that didn't belong. He leaned closer to the edge of the boat, squinting through the murky water. The shimmer returned, flickering as the sun rose higher. At first he thought it was trash. The swamp was full of old junk, rusted barrels or discarded metal. Maybe it was a car part or a piece of machinery left years ago. He gripped the side of the boat, cautious. Reaching with his pole, he tapped the water, stirring up small clouds of mud. The shape didn't move. It stayed exactly where it was. Squinting harder, he realized the shape wasn't random. The edges were too straight, the outline too precise. Something was submerged beneath the black water, heavy, solid, and still. He edged the boat closer, careful not to disturb the area too much. Each movement stirred silt, making the water darker. Yet the object remained clear enough to see. A flat surface, a curve, another straight edge. Slowly, the pieces came together. The shape under the water was larger than any barrel or scrap he had ever seen. His chest tightened. His heart began to beat faster. Could this really be what he thought? He stared, frozen. The shape was sinking slightly into the mud, but it was unmistakable. Not trash, not random metal, something else. Something important. He reached for his phone with trembling hands, realizing he had discovered something that could change everything. As the sun rose, the light hit the water at a new angle. Suddenly, the outline sharpened. The flat surface became a roof. A curve became a hood. A straight line formed a door frame. His chest tightened further. He knew what he was seeing. This was no ordinary object. This was a car, sunk deep into the mud, resting for who knows how many years. The weight of the discovery pressed down on him. This was something serious. Something connected to a story he had heard long ago. 19 years ago, a young officer had vanished on a lonely highway, and now, maybe, her patrol car had been lying here the whole time. He leaned closer, trying to see details. The mud covered much of the vehicle, and the water made it hard to be certain. Yet the overall shape, the size, and the angles were undeniable. He gripped the side of the boat, swallowing hard. The realization made his hands shake. 19 years of mystery, 19 years of searching, and now, maybe, he had found the first piece of truth. He paused, staring at the murky water, imagining the night so long ago. The missing officer, the empty cruiser, the unanswered questions. Everything came rushing back in his mind. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself. Authorities had to be called. This was bigger than him, bigger than any fisherman's quiet morning on the swamp. His fingers hovered over his phone. The signal was weak, but he had to try. Someone needed to see this. Someone needed to confirm it. The swamp remained silent, hiding its secret for decades, now finally beginning to reveal it. The sun broke higher, glinting again on the mud and water, and the shape was clearer than ever. A car. The patrol car. The one that had disappeared almost 20 years ago. The fisherman pulled his phone from his pocket, hands shaking. He explained as clearly as he could. "I think I found a patrol car in the swamp. It's been here a long time." Dispatchers listened carefully, then alerted local police. Within minutes, the swamp began to change. The quiet morning was replaced by the sound of engines, footsteps, and voices. Boats were launched into the water. Trucks carrying divers and gear rumbled along muddy banks. Officers moved quickly, setting up a controlled perimeter. Locals had started to arrive, curious and concerned. They stood quietly on the edges of the swamp, watching the sudden activity. Cameras from nearby news crews began clicking, capturing the moment. Everyone seemed to sense something extraordinary was unfolding. Divers prepared in wetsuits, checking oxygen tanks, ropes, and flashlights. The officers on shore coordinated signals and surveyed the swamp, eyes scanning every dark patch of water. Every second stretched long and tense. The fisherman guided the authorities to the exact spot. His heart raced. He had discovered something no one had seen in nearly 20 years. The air felt heavier, the swamp darker, as if holding its breath. Boats shifted carefully over the water. Officers stayed alert, knowing the weight of what they might find. Every movement was deliberate. The sun continued to rise, shining weak light across the black water, reflecting off ripples and debris. Yet beneath, the shadow of the car remained, still and silent. For a moment, the swamp seemed to pause. It had held its secret for decades. Now, the secret was finally coming to light, and everyone watching could feel the tension building, knowing the mystery of the missing officer might soon be solved. Two divers slipped quietly into the murky water, fins cutting through the black surface. The swamp was cold, muddy, and almost pitch dark beneath the reflection of morning light. Their hands moved cautiously along hidden objects, feeling blindly through thick algae and soft mud. Each movement sent tiny clouds of silt into the water, making visibility even worse. Seconds felt like minutes. The divers were silent, communicating only through hand signals. Every touch could be the car or just another scrap of metal. Then one hand brushed a cold, hard surface. The diver paused, feeling carefully along the edges. It was smooth, solid, not natural, not debris. Slowly the shape emerged. Roof, hood, door frame. Every inch revealed more of a vehicle, heavy and lodged deep in the mud. Fingers traced the side. Algae had covered the surface for years, but faint letters began to appear. Highway Patrol. The words sent a shiver through the diver. They were real. The patrol car, missing for nearly 2 decades, was here, hidden beneath the swamp. Divers signaled the surface. Officers on the shore leaned forward, eyes wide, breaths held. The confirmation was coming slowly but unmistakably. Carefully, the divers checked the interior. Mud and water had taken their toll, but fragments of the dash, seats, and even a radio remained. They could see remnants of the uniform once worn by the missing officer. The water was still around them. The swamp, which had kept its secret for almost 20 years, seemed to quiet in recognition. Every movement was deliberate. Every second mattered. The divers knew the world was waiting, that lives would change once the truth was revealed. Slowly the patrol car's outline became clear. It had been silent for years, unseen by search teams, untouched by time except for water and mud. The divers would soon bring it to the surface, and with it, the answers, or at least part of them, would finally emerge. Cables were fastened carefully around the patrol car. A crane groaned as it began to lift, pulling the wreck slowly through the thick water. Mud, weeds, and years of swamp buildup slid off, revealing more of the vehicle with every inch. Officers on the shore held their breath. Cameras clicked. Every movement was deliberate, every second tense. The boat carrying the fisherman hovered nearby, silent, as he watched the scene unfold. The water poured off the car, creating waves in the black swamp. Rust had eaten parts of the metal, and the roof sagged from years of pressure. Yet the cruiser was unmistakable. The lines, the size, and the color made it clear. This was the missing officer's vehicle. Divers guided it carefully to shallower water, checking ropes and cables. They moved slowly, ensuring the car didn't tilt or break apart. Every officer on the bank leaned forward, knowing the importance of this moment. Finally, the car settled on firm ground. Mud clung to the tires, Water ran from the broken windows, and weeds hung from the undercarriage. The patrol cruiser had emerged from nearly 2 decades underwater. Officers approached cautiously. The doors were examined, the roof checked for structural weaknesses. The weight of the vehicle and the history it carried made everyone silent. Inside, items from the past were still visible. A radio, a torn piece of uniform, and then something that confirmed the grim truth. The badge, still in place, partially hidden under debris. The swamp, which had kept this secret for 19 years, had finally released it. The discovery sent shockwaves through everyone watching. The missing officer's story was no longer just a cold case. It had a tangible piece of evidence in front of them. Through the shattered glass, skeletal remains were visible in the driver's seat. The bones were still seated, slumped, as if the officer had never left her car. Time had taken flesh and blood, leaving only the silent proof of her fate. Fragments of her uniform clung to the skeleton. Pieces of dark green and tan fabric, faded and torn, confirmed her identity. Her badge, partially buried in mud and debris on the seat, revealed the unthinkable. This was the missing patrol officer, 19 years gone and now found. Divers and investigators photographed every angle carefully, documenting each detail. Every inch of the car told a story, waterlogged, rusted, crushed, but intact enough to reveal the truth. Officers exchanged grim looks. The scene was tragic. The confirmation made the mystery real, and the years of uncertainty hit everyone at once. The fisherman, standing nearby, could hardly speak. He had stumbled on something far bigger than himself. 19 years of questions, fear, and grief were finally met with a horrifying clarity. Outside, news crews whispered among themselves. The story of the missing officer, once just speculation and rumor, now had evidence to support it. Every observer felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a car. It was a life lost, a family's grief, a community's fear made real. Word spread almost instantly. The small town was shocked. News outlets picked up the story, sharing images of the patrol car and the discovery in the swamp. Officers wept quietly, remembering the young, dedicated colleague they had lost. They had hoped for years that answers might come, but seeing her finally found left them stunned and emotional. The community reeled. People whispered, cried, and comforted one another. 19 years of worry, rumors, and fear had ended, but the grief was raw. Her family received the news. Tears fell freely. 19 years of waiting, praying, and hoping had led to this moment. Their daughter, their sister, their friend had been lost for nearly 2 decades, and now, at last, she was found. Yet even with the discovery, questions remained. How had searches missed this swamp for so many years? Was it an accident, or was something more sinister at play? The swamp had hidden the patrol officer and her cruiser for nearly 2 decades, keeping its secrets deep under mud and water. The truth was partially revealed, but the full story might never be known. Authorities confirmed the identification. Skeletal remains, the uniform fragments, and the badge left no doubt. The missing officer had been found. The story of her disappearance, once a national mystery, finally had answers, but not all of them. Closure was bittersweet, relief mixed with sorrow. For the family, the department, and the community, the patrol officer's return from the swamp was both an ending and a reminder. 19 years had passed, yet the world was left asking, what really happened on that lonely highway? News broke quickly. Photos of the rusted patrol cruiser rising from the swamp and skeletal remains inside hit newspapers and TV screens across the country. The story spread faster than anyone expected. America watched in disbelief. Headlines screamed, "Officer missing for 19 years found in swamp," and "Cold case patrol officer discovered." The small town that had whispered about the case for decades suddenly became the focus of a national audience. Social media didn't exist in 1985, but now every network broadcasted live footage. Reporters rushed to the swamp, cameras rolling as authorities examined the scene. Anchors recounted the story of the young officer who vanished on a lonely highway, a mystery that had haunted families and colleagues for nearly 2 decades. People in other states called relatives in the town. They shared disbelief and shock. For some, It was like watching history repeat itself. A cold case reopened in the most dramatic way possible. Inside the department, older officers who had been on the case in 1985 were speechless. They had combed every inch of the highway, retraced every path, and searched every corner of the town. Now, the answer came from miles away, in a swamp no one had fully searched. Family members struggled to process the news. Relief mixed with sorrow. 19 years of wondering, praying, and hopping were finally answered, but in the most tragic way. Even the community that had lived with uncertainty now had a moment to stare at the truth. The missing officer was no longer a ghost story. She was real, and her story was being told for the entire nation to see. The shock wasn't just emotional, it was everywhere. From morning newspapers to evening broadcasts, from small diners to large city offices, the discovery gripped the country. Everyone wanted to know, how did this happen, and why did it take so long to find her? Investigators began examining the cruiser carefully. Every item inside was documented, photographed, and collected. Nothing was left to chance. Inside the vehicle, her badge lay on the driver's seat, partially covered with mud. Its letters, Highway Patrol, were still visible. Officers lifted it with gloves, placing it in a protective bag. It was more than metal. It was a symbol of her duty and the life she had dedicated to service. Next, they recovered her sidearm, corroded but intact. The weapon had not been fired in years, yet it carried the weight of the decades she had been missing. Each artifact was labeled carefully, logged into evidence, and stored for the ongoing investigation. Fragments of her uniform were found clinging to the remains. Officers handled them gently. The fabric, waterlogged and faded, spoke to the time she had spent trapped underwater, the pressure of the swamp, and the silence that followed her disappearance. Every recovered piece was heavy with meaning. For investigators, these items were not just objects. They were keys to understanding what had happened, to finally connecting the past with the present. Divers and forensic specialists moved slowly, making sure nothing was damaged. The swamp had preserved the car but destroyed most other evidence. Every small clue mattered. Family members watched from a distance, struggling to see personal items of their loved one collected in plastic bags. It was a mix of grief and relief. At last, the missing officer had been identified through tangible proof. The evidence confirmed the story that had haunted the town for nearly 20 years. The cruiser, her badge, her sidearm, and fragments of her uniform were the final links to a night that had remained a mystery for decades. The medical examiner worked quickly but carefully. The remains from the swamp were examined in detail. Every bone, fragment, and piece of fabric was analyzed to confirm identity. Fingerprints were impossible after 19 years underwater, but other clues remained. Dental records, uniform fragments, and the badge provided evidence. The process was methodical, precise, and somber. After hours of examination, the official confirmation came. The remains belonged to the missing patrol officer. 19 years of searching, waiting, and wondering were officially over. The department released the news to family and the community. Relief and sorrow collided. Finally, the decades-long uncertainty had a definite answer. The missing officer was no longer just a story or a rumor. She was real, and her fate had been confirmed. The autopsy report revealed that she had been trapped inside her cruiser. The swamp had preserved some evidence, but erased many details. Investigators could now focus on piecing together what had happened on that fateful night. For her family, the confirmation was heartbreaking. 19 years of unanswered questions, of imagining possibilities, now had a truth to hold on to, even if it was tragic. Within the department, younger officers learned the full story. Older officers reflected on the case and the mistakes or oversights that may have allowed the car to go undiscovered for so long. Across the town, people paused. The mystery that had lingered for almost 2 decades had finally reached an official conclusion. Yet even as the autopsy confirmed the identity, many questions remained unanswered. The missing officer had been found, and the evidence told a story, but the full truth of what had happened on that highway that night might never be completely known. Once the patrol car was recovered, doubts began to spread. How had no one found it for nearly 20 years? Searches in 1985 had scoured the area, yet the car had remained hidden in the swamp. Detectives questioned every step of the original investigation. Did they miss something obvious? Had the swamp been overlooked? Or was it possible someone had deliberately hidden the cruiser, keeping the mystery alive for decades? Theories multiplied quickly. Some said it must have been an accident, she lost control, and the car sank in a place that was difficult to access. Others whispered darker ideas. A deliberate act, a push into the swamp, a murder masked by time and water. Investigators and officers exchanged uneasy looks. 19 years of unanswered questions hung over the department. Each officer recalled the young patrolwoman's dedication, her careful driving, and her skill. Could someone truly have caused her death without leaving other evidence? The community, following news updates, felt the tension. Locals asked why the car had gone unnoticed for so long. Questions erupted in town meetings, at the station, and on local news segments. Even with the car recovered, the story was incomplete. The swamp had preserved the cruiser, but it had erased much else. The truth of that night, the full story of what happened on that lonely highway, remained frustratingly out of reach. For the family, the questions were the hardest part. They now knew where she had been, but not exactly how or why she ended up there. Relief collided with confusion, sorrow with suspicion. Every new revelation brought more uncertainty. The search for answers had changed, but it had not ended. And the more people asked, the more they realized how much remained a mystery. Investigators worked carefully on the recovered cruiser, searching for signs of force or foul play. Every panel of metal was examined. Every dent, scratch, or bent frame was documented. Divers and forensic experts had already seen the car submerged for nearly 20 years. Water, mud, and pressure had erased most evidence. Many clues that might have shown an accident or an attack were gone. Forensic teams tested the doors, steering wheel, and windows for any signs of struggle. They checked for fingerprints and tool marks. Each test was meticulous, but the swamp had taken its toll. Most evidence was lost. Detectives compared the recovered cruiser to old case files, accident reports, and witness statements. Nothing fit perfectly. No scratches on the roadside, no drag marks in the mud, no tire prints leading away from the scene. Theories were suggested, but almost none could be proven. Even the possibility of a deliberate act, the push into the swamp, remained speculation. The water had hidden the truth as effectively as time itself. Investigators documented every finding, careful to note what could and could not be confirmed. The swamp had given back the car, but almost everything else was gone. The team worked quietly, aware that public attention was intense. Everyone wanted answers, but the evidence could only tell a partial story. For the family and community, frustration grew. They wanted justice, a clear explanation. The recovered cruiser was proof, but proof alone could not reveal the full truth. Some officers whispered about mistakes from the original investigation. Others suggested the swamp had simply done its work. Regardless, the testing ended with no definitive conclusion. Her family gathered near the swamp, watching as the recovered car was examined. Tears ran freely, but anger also burned beneath the surface. Relief and grief collided in heavy waves. For nearly 20 years they had hoped for answers. They had prayed, held vigils, and searched for any clue. Now, the missing officer had been found, but the truth of what happened remained uncertain. Parents hugged each other, trying to process the shock. Siblings stared at the car, memories of their loved one flooding back. Every detail, the badge, the sidearm, the fragments of uniform, was a reminder of both her life and her death. At the same time, rage took hold. How could the car have gone undiscovered for so long? How could searches have failed? The swamp had kept secrets that authorities could not uncover, leaving them with only partial answers. They asked questions quietly and angrily. Why now? Why so late? And most painfully, why had their daughter or sister been alone for so long in a place no one reached? Even relief was bitter. The discovery solved one mystery but opened others. The lack of closure on how she vanished made every hug, every tear, and every memory heavy with frustration. The family stood silently as the investigation continued around them. They were grateful to finally know where she had been, but the lack of definitive answers weighed on their hearts. Every artifact removed from the car, every photograph taken, reminded them of years lost and a life ended too soon. 19 years of searching had led to a discovery, but not justice, not peace. The swamp had returned their loved one, but it had not returned the full truth. After weeks of reviewing old files, senior officers made a quiet admission. The swamp had been part of the original search in 1985. Patrols had combed the waterline, dragged boats along its shallow edges, and examined nearby banks. Yet somehow the cruiser had gone unnoticed. The rusted patrol car, containing the remains of their young officer, had been right there all along. Some speculated it was a simple mistake. The swamp was thick, muddy, and full of hidden pockets where a vehicle could sink and hide. Searches could easily miss a car that had settled deep into the mud. Other whispers were darker. Could it have been deliberately overlooked? Had someone wanted the cruiser, and the truth, to remain hidden? Questions that had never been asked in public now hovered over the department. Detectives reviewed reports from 1985. All protocols had been followed, or so the records said. Witnesses recalled dragging boats across the swamp, scanning with flashlights and calling out for the missing officer. Still, the car had stayed submerged, invisible to those who had searched. The realization hit hard. For decades, the department had worked under the belief that every lead had been exhausted, every area cleared. And yet, one key piece of evidence had been missed. Family members were informed gently. Relief came at last, tempered with disbelief and anger. The answers they had hoped for were only partially provided. Officers acknowledged the human error quietly. Internally, questions of responsibility, oversight, and missed opportunities would linger indefinitely. The swamp had kept its secret, and the truth about the original investigation would remain murky. For the town and the family, the revelation was bitter. The missing officer's story had always been tragic, but now a new layer of sorrow and frustration was added. The search had been incomplete, and years of hope had been spent in vain. With the car finally recovered and evidence documented, the focus of the investigation shifted. This was no longer just about the night she vanished. It was about nearly 2 decades of unanswered questions, oversights, and hidden truths. Investigators reviewed every step. Old search maps were compared with new measurements. Every report, every call, and every tip from 1985 was revisited. They wanted to understand how the patrol car had remained hidden for so long. The story that once centered solely on a missing officer became a case study in the limits of human observation and the persistence of time. The swamp had been a silent witness, keeping the truth buried. For the department, the recovered evidence was sobering. It forced officers to reflect on past procedures, missed details, and the challenges of searching remote areas. It also reminded them that even the most thorough investigations can leave vital clues behind. Family members, while devastated by the long-lost years, gained a new perspective. They saw not just the tragedy of their loved one's death, but also the systemic failures that allowed the mystery to linger. Relief and grief were intertwined with frustration and anger. News outlets reported the transformation of the case. Headlines emphasized not only the discovery of the missing officer, but also the revelation that critical evidence had gone undiscovered for almost 20 years. The public saw how a simple patrol route could turn into a story that spanned decades. The mystery of the vanished officer had evolved. It was no longer just about the disappearance. It was about the lessons learned, the errors made, and the ways time can conceal the truth. Even as investigators worked to understand the final hours of her life, everyone realized that the case had grown into something larger than the patrol officer herself. It was now a story about hidden truths, the fragility of memory, and how justice and closure can be delayed, but eventually demanded. The case had transformed. The missing officer had been found, yet the questions about how and why she disappeared would continue to echo. The day of the funeral, sunlight cut through the morning fog. Officers lined the streets, standing at attention. Their hats were in hand, their faces solemn. They had waited nearly 2 decades for this moment. Family members walked slowly behind the casket. Mothers, fathers, siblings, nieces, and nephews, all carrying grief heavier than most could imagine. Every step was filled with memory, sorrow, and relief. Finally, their loved one was coming home. The town gathered in silence. People from decades past came to pay respects. Some had lived with questions about her disappearance for years. Others had watched the news reports in 2004, seeing the car and her remains emerge from the swamp. Now, they were here to honor her life and service. A chaplain spoke softly, acknowledging the tragedy of a young life lost, the courage of an officer dedicated to duty, and the heartbreak of 19 years without answers. Tears ran freely down faces in the crowd. Each person carried a part of the story with them: fear, hope, grief, and relief. Officers who had been young recruits when she vanished now stood as veterans. They shared silent nods, remembering the calls, the searches, and the lost nights of hope. For them, this was closure, but it was also a painful reminder of the questions that remained unanswered. As the casket was lowered into the earth, the family stood hand in hand. The air was heavy with grief, yet lighter with relief. She was home. She was finally at rest. People whispered prayers and goodbyes. The town had waited years for this moment, and now, at last, the missing officer was part of the ground she had once patrolled, part of the town she had protected. Authorities released their official conclusion. The officer's death was an accident. She must have swerved off the road and into the swamp. No one else was involved, they said. Investigators explained that the patrol car had slipped into a deep pocket of mud, sinking quickly and remaining hidden for 19 years. With the passage of time and the swamp's natural covering, no physical evidence remained to suggest foul play. The statement was brief and matter-of-fact. The public heard it on TV, in newspapers, and on the radio. It was meant to close the case, to provide finality. Yet even as officials labeled it an accident, questions lingered. People wondered how a skilled officer could lose control on a familiar stretch of highway. They wondered why the car went undiscovered for so long. For some, the conclusion was enough. For others, it was unsatisfying. Officially, the case was closed. The story of the vanished officer had an ending, though not one everyone believed. Her parents refused to accept the official conclusion. They had raised a careful, capable daughter. She was precise, focused, and always aware of her surroundings. The thought that she had lost control of her vehicle felt impossible. Siblings shared the same disbelief. They remembered her confidence behind the wheel, her attention to detail, her commitment to safety. An accident, they insisted, did not fit the person they knew. The family also questioned the long delay in finding her car. 19 years had passed before it was discovered in a swamp that had been searched in 1985. How could she have ended up there unseen for almost 2 decades? They wondered if mistakes had been made, or worse, if something had been hidden. Could someone have tampered with the scene or misled the original investigation? The lack of answers fueled frustration and anger. Despite grief, the family remained vocal. They gave interviews, attended memorials, and spoke at community gatherings. Their message was clear. They would not accept a story that did not align with the truth they knew of their loved one. Friends and neighbors supported them, sharing memories that highlighted her skill, courage, and responsibility. Each story reinforced the family's belief. She would not have vanished by accident. Even as the funeral concluded and the official statement circulated, the family's resolve did not waver. They mourned, yes, but they also challenged the narrative. To them, the case was not truly closed. The swamp had returned their loved one, but it had not returned all the answers. They would carry this truth forward, honoring her memory while insisting that the real story of what happened that night might still be hidden. Inside the police department, whispers began to circulate. Officers quietly speculated about the 1985 searches. Some wondered if mistakes had been made. Others feared something darker, that evidence had been overlooked on purpose. Conversations happened behind closed doors. Detectives who had worked the original case shook their heads, unsure how the cruiser had been missed. Some suggested that reputations were at stake. Perhaps admitting errors would embarrass the department, so the truth remained partially hidden. Rumors spread slowly at first, then faster. While nothing was officially confirmed, the seeds of doubt took hold. The public wanted answers, but inside the department, people spoke only in cautious tones. Every officer who had served during that era carried a private concern. Could they have done more? Should they have noticed something earlier? The questions hung in the air, unanswered, feeding speculation. Even decades later, the story of the vanished officer was not just about tragedy. It was about human error, oversight, and the possibility that some truths are left buried, intentionally or by accident. In town, opinions split. Some residents accepted the official story. The patrolwoman had swerved into the swamp and drowned. They saw the car, the remains, and concluded it was an accident. Others were not convinced. They remembered her skill, her careful driving, and questioned why the cruiser had been hidden for nearly 20 years. Many suspected that mistakes, or worse, had kept the truth from them. Conversations at cafes, town halls, and family gatherings reflected this divide. Friends argued gently or sharply. The vanished officer became more than a story. She became a symbol of uncertainty. The town's memory of that summer night in 1985 shifted depending on who was speaking. Some told a story of tragedy. Others whispered about hidden errors or cover-ups. Even decades later, the disappearance remained a dividing line, a reminder that the truth is not always simple, and that communities hold multiple, conflicting stories about the same event. Reporters called it haunting. After 19 years, the swamp had returned what was lost. Her patrol car, her remains, and her uniform fragments emerged from the murky water. The community felt shock and grief, relief and sorrow, all at once. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the officer's family could see the final resting place of their loved one. But the swamp had given only part of the story. Years underwater had erased almost every clue. Any evidence that might explain how she ended up there, accident, foul play, or something else, was gone. Investigators could document what they found, but proving cause or motive was nearly impossible. For the family, the discovery was both a gift and a curse. Confirmation of death, but no clear answers. The water held onto its secrets. It had protected the truth, then released it slowly, leaving a community in awe and despair. The swamp had returned their officer, but it had not returned the full story of what happened that night. The case file was stamped closed. Officially, authorities said no further action was needed. The missing officer's disappearance was resolved on paper. But for her family, the closure felt incomplete. They had her remains, yes, but not the answers they had longed for. Fellow officers shared similar feelings. Years of unanswered questions could not be erased. Even the town's residents carried the weight of doubt and suspicion. Memorials, articles, and stories would continue. People would remember her bravery, her life, and the night she vanished. But emotional closure was elusive. The official end of the case marked one thing: the paperwork was complete. The truth, however, remained only partially revealed. Memories, grief, and questions continued to linger. The story of the vanished officer had an ending, but it was not neat. It was complex, emotional, and unresolved in the hearts of all who knew her or followed her story. In the end, the story remained haunting. A young, brave officer vanished in the line of duty. Her patrol car was hidden, her life ended, and for nearly 20 years no one knew where she had gone. Even after she was found, the world kept asking the same questions. How did she end up in the swamp? Was it truly an accident? Could someone have been involved? And why had it taken so long to discover her? The community, the family, and the police force all struggled with these unanswered questions. Some clung to official conclusions. Others whispered about mistakes, missteps, or worse, intentional oversights. Her legacy lived on through stories, memorials, and the memories of those who had known her. She became more than a missing officer. She became a symbol of the risks law enforcement officers face, the fragility of life, and the mysteries that time can hide. Decades of uncertainty had tested the patience and hearts of everyone involved. But even with her remains returned, clarity was incomplete. The swamp had given back her body, but it had kept its secrets. For the family, there was grief, relief, and anger all at once. For the town, there was memory, speculation, and lingering fear. For the department, there was reflection on past procedures, missed opportunities, and the limits of investigation. The vanished officer's story is a reminder that some mysteries never fully die. Answers may come slowly, partially, or never at all. Her service, her disappearance, and the long road to discovery left a permanent mark. Even with closure on paper, the questions continue to echo. And for anyone who hears this story, the haunting truth remains. A life taken in service, a mystery that endured for decades, and a world still left asking how and why.